In 1933, some council workmen were digging sand from a very large quarry at Bellsmeadow in Falkirk, and they reached a depth of 7 feet when one of them heard a clunking sound coming from his spade and realised he'd hit a solid object. And as they removed the sand, silver coins came cascading down the hillside, and of course what he had hit was a Roman coin hoard. The authorities in Edinburgh, the experts, were immediately called in, gathered up the evidence and took it back to the National Museum for safety. But a few of the coins were retained by the workmen and eventually made their way into Falkirk Museum. And the coins consisted of 2,000 examples, which makes it the largest known coin hoard from Scotland to date. And the coins date from between 83 BC and 230 AD. Now that's a time range of some 313 years. So you can imagine having a coin over 300 years old in your pocket today. It'd be most unusual. And the one thing that they have in common is that they all have a high silver content. And it looks like they've been deliberately garnered in order to reuse, to melt down, probably to make jewellery. And so it's the bullion rather than the face value that they're collected for. The site at which the coins were found is 400 metres north of the Antonine Wall, and it's quite significant because it was part of what was known as Wormett Hill, where we have reason to believe there was a native settlement at the time that the Romans were around. The 3rd century was a particularly troublesome time for the Roman Empire. They were hemmed in by troublesome barbarians on every frontier. And it looks like the bullion was actually paid by the Romans to the native chief, so we have that big chief again, in order to bribe him to stop him going down to Hadrian's Wall and beating the Romans up. It would have been cheaper for the Romans to have paid these bribes than it would have been to put an army into the field. They were concealed deliberately. I mean, the great depth of 7 feet shows that they were deliberately hidden in order to keep them safe. And the question then, of course, arises as to why they were never recovered, because they would have been worth millions in today's terms. And the obvious thing to think of is warfare. Were the owners, the people who had buried them, killed? But there are other possibilities such as disease. Epidemics without modern drugs would have wiped out whole communities. And you might have had changing political affiliations as well. But the coins were contained in an orange pot, which is a very common everyday 3rd century cooking pot. What is unusual is that the mouth of the pot was sealed by a piece of textile which was preserved in the corrosion products of the silver. It created an anaerobic atmosphere, so the bacteria were not able to get at the wool of which the textile is made. And you can just make out on the surface of the textile a checkered pattern of colours, now kind of a dull brown and buff colour, but it's widely acknowledged as being the oldest known tartan in Scotland. Not the oldest in the world, but the oldest in Scotland, which of course is significant from a local and a national history point of view. And the reason why we've chosen it as our 4th object is not just the fact that it's the oldest tartan from Scotland, but whereas the Bridgeness tablet shows Rome at its might of empire, the tartan shows a fragile empire beginning to decay. So it's very much worthy of including in our list of 10.5 objects.